My passion has always been connecting like the everyday angler with the science. I think the more fishermen can be involved in science, the better it is for the resource, the more trust we can have between scientists and fishermen. It's just better for the whole process. So I kind of got a chance to use my background and my passion a little bit more to support the resource in this role.
This is the Tom Rowland Podcast. Fascinating stories to amaze, encourage, and inspire you in fishing, fitness, and the outdoors. And we're brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. I started this podcast as a way to connect with my friends, people that I admire and respect, and you. It has been a learning journey that's made me a better person, a better fisherman, a better father, and a better athlete. I'm so happy that you're on this journey with me, and I'd love to hear from you with show suggestions, guest suggestions, or questions. The best way to get a hold of me is through text. You can text 305-930-7346 for the fastest response, but if you prefer to email, you can send that to podcast@saltwaterexperience.com. That's a dedicated email address just for the show. If you like this show, you can show your support by posting about it on social media and tagging me. Text the link to a couple of friends that may also enjoy it, and subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you feel like I've earned it. The website is tomrowlandpodcast.com, and that is where everything lives. All past shows, you can go and listen to any show. You can look up all the different shows that we've done, both the How To Tuesdays, the full links, and the physical Fridays. They all live on tomrowlandpodcast.com. And the social media is Tom_Rowland, ROWLAND, on Instagram, or you can go to our big account, Saltwater_Experience. I hope to hear from you soon. So now, let's get on to today's show.
My name is Nick Haddad with Return 'em Right, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
Nick, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to have you on here. I think what you're doing is really cool. I'm anxious to learn a lot more about it. Return 'em Right. Tell me about that.
Yes. So Return 'em Right is a really cool program. It's a new program that works with anglers to reduce discard mortality from barotrauma in reef fish offshore. So a lot of us go offshore fishing. We have a great day. We catch a fish that's either out of season, too small, we met our bag limit, we let it go, and we see it float off on the surface and get eaten by a shark or a dolphin. And it's an unpleasant sight. And, there's ways that we can reduce that or prevent that from happening. And it helps the anglers out, and it also helps the resource out. So that's what we're here to do.
Well, that's obviously a really big problem. In the Keys, I see it, with all different kinds of fish, but really with the red snapper, like you're out there mutton snapper fishing, and then the red snappers have been very prolific. We have a lot more of them. At one point, it was not a problem at all. I mean, they were rarely ever getting caught, and I don't know what happened, but there's a lot more of them now, and you can't keep them for most of the time, and they're very, difficult to release, I guess, sometimes for a lot of people. And so, the ethical and moral thing to do is to, if that's what you're catching and it's not in season, you need to move on, right? But not everybody operates that way. This might be their first and only trip down to the Florida Keys. They're catching these fish. They want to keep going. It is possible to release them with different devices, and I guess that's what you're doing. How did this all start for you to get this program going, and where did it come from?
So this program comes from funding from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Mm-hmm. So the program is actually in the works for a long time, and it's designed to restore fish impacted from that spill. Okay,
and it's everywhere. I mean, that program, obviously, the Deepwater Horizon was in Louisiana, but this program is all over the place, right? So. How does that start? Was it designed to be a Louisiana funded studies and Louisiana funded programs, and then this one just happens to be something that is applicable in a lot of other places, or how does it work?
So the program's designed to be Gulf of Mexico focused.
Okay.
So a cool component of our project is, in addition to providing education, we actually provide free release gear to anglers to use on the water.
Wow.
So we want to provide not just the knowledge, but the tools to actually, go out there and successfully release reef fish. But, with the Atlantic having a 2-day red snapper season, and a good year sometimes, there's a lot of spillover. A lot of people travel to the Gulf of Mexico to fish. So it's still a Gulf of Mexico focused program. But the free gear spills over to the South Atlantic a bit, and the education is really relevant everywhere. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, barotrauma and discard mortality is not just a local problem; it's a global issue. So, education is available to everyone. The resources for the free gear are limited to anglers that fish in the Gulf of Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that, the education a bit, because, on this podcast, we have lots of inshore fishermen, lots of freshwater fishermen, lots of
Yep.
people that aren't really familiar with barotrauma. And can you tell them what it is and how it happens and what the solution is?
I can, yeah. So barotrauma is
You probably
a
talk about this all the
pressure-related
time.
injury. I've done it once or twice
Okay.
before. So barotrauma is a pressure-related injury that fish experience when you reel them up from deep water. What happens is the pressure change actually causes the gases in their body to expand, and they blow up almost like a balloon. And this typically happens in depths of 50, 60 feet or more, but it can happen shallower for some species. For example, hogfish. I'm here off the Tampa Bay area. A lot of people fish for hogfish in 40 feet of water, and they can experience barotrauma at shallower depths. So really, there's two main solutions when this happens. You have one is to release that gas so that they can overcome the buoyancy and swim down on their own, and you do that with a venting tool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're using a hollow needle and putting it into a fish, so you have to be careful how you do it, where you do it. So there's a little bit more room for air. Or there's the use of descending devices, which actually carry the fish back down to depth. It allows them to recompress naturally. So the exact same thing that's happening on the way up is just happening in reverse on the way down. You release them at depth, and they're free to swim off on their own. Both do work very well when done properly. But venting, putting a needle in a fish, having to know the anatomy, having to make sure all the air comes out, you're introducing the option or the potential for infection by putting a hole in the fish's side. There's just a little bit more room for air. In my opinion, it's very important for anglers to know how to do both, to carry both on the boat with them, and do what works best for them in a given situation.
That's interesting. So, wonder why it is that some fish are more prone to it. Like you mentioned the hog snapper, and then you take another fish like a swordfish that can obviously go from much, much, much deeper to the surface and have zero problem. Do you know anything about that? Like, why is it that certain ones are more prone to it?
Yeah, part of it's the anatomy of the fish. So physoclistus fish don't have like a connection between their air gut and their swim bladder, so they can't self-regulate that air quite as well when they come up to the surface. But really, it's just, I mean, even within certain species like red snapper, red grouper, gag grouper, even they have different depths where they seem to be able to get back down fine. So it's just, I think it's just the nature of the beast that some can handle the pressure change different than others can.
Mm-hmm. And do you know what? At one point, there was a legal, like they made it a rule that you had to have like a venting tool or you had to have a descending device. I don't know. Do you know what the rule is in the Gulf of Mexico and what you have to have on the boat?
Yeah, the current rule is called the Descend Act, and it actually went into effect January 13th of last year, and it requires anglers who are fishing for reef fish to either carry a venting tool or a descending device rigged and ready to use. So you're not required to carry both or one or the other, but you do have to have at least one tool to mitigate the effects of barotrauma with you when you're fishing for reef fish.
So that could be any sort
And
of
that's
a
federal
hollow
waters.
in federal waters. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
tricky to know exactly what are federal waters and what are not. So as far as the education goes, do you find that a lot of anglers don't know about that act and don't know that they're supposed to, by law, have these devices on the boat with them?
Yeah, so in the Atlantic, it was required descending only back in 2020, and I found a lot of people still. I mean, we're almost 3 years later, and a lot of people still are unaware that that's a regulation. In the Descend Act, I think the states really pushed out the messaging. So I think people are a little bit more aware of the Descend Act being only a year into it than maybe, the South Atlantic side. But just because they're aware of the Descend Act doesn't mean they're aware of descending devices. We actually, through this project, did a survey end of last year, and only 32% of anglers in the whole Gulf of Mexico that fish for reef fish were aware of descending devices. So that's a great mechanism to improve survival. It's probably the safest mechanism for the angler and the fish to reduce discard mortality, and only a quarter of anglers who fish for those species were even aware of it. And you can't do that option if you don't know it exists.
Right. And with all you got a really cool Instagram, like the Return 'em Right Instagram, all the different videos of fish descending and then coming off of the device and swimming away. Like they're perfectly fine. Which I think that's one of the most interesting parts about this is that you can actually put a GoPro on a line now and send it down and see what's happening. And before GoPro, this would be a real kind of mystery because you're going down deep enough to where it might be difficult to put a diver down there. I don't know. It's a long way down in a lot of places, and does this work? But your videos are showing without a shadow of a doubt that it's working. Do you have any idea what the mortality rates are have you tagged any fish and then descended, and do you have any kind of data on that at all other than the videos?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of published research already, and our project is actually funding 4 new studies to do the same exact thing, to tag fish. We're actually working with captains and charter captains to release fish with Go Fish cameras, so you can actually to see if there's any depredation with dolphins or sharks. So we have 4 studies in the works right now just through our project that aren't wrapped up yet, but previous research, for example, Brendan Rund he's with the Nature Conservancy now, I believe. He used to be with NC State. He did a actually a bunch of great studies on barotrauma and the use of descending devices, and he found the survival was 87% for red snapper in the off of North Carolina using a descending device. Now that's a lot better than the 28.5% discard mortality rate the council uses. So in theory, if you can cut that mortality rate in half, then that's that many more fish you get to keep.
Right.
So it's there's quite a bit of research that supports greatly improved success and survival through venting and descending, or doing one or the other. The issue, though, is a lot of these studies with venting, you have scientists who are trained that know exactly how to vent, know exactly what to do. They're the ones doing the research, doing the study. When in an environment where you're dealing with 4 million recreational anglers, not all of them are going to have that same precision with a venting tool. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of research, and actually on our website we have a resources page that highlights a bunch of different scientific publications, and we just pull a couple facts out of them that might be interesting to people.
Wow. So going back to the beginning of this program, did you start the program, or did you just? What's your history with this?
So I was brought on in the first year to Florida Sea Grant as a communications manager 100% of the time on this project. So when I came into this project, there was no Return 'em Right brand. We work with different partners, but our goal was to develop this angler-driven brand that was kind of independent of any other organization, something that can kind of live on its own and be what we like to say is guided by anglers but grounded in science. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of part of the early, the actual branding came on after I was brought onto the project, but the project, the project outline and the project, different partners involved and what we were going to do was, or anticipated to do was set into place before I got brought on.
And what's your background, like education or how do you? I guess what I'm asking in a roundabout way is how do you end up running a program like this? Like it's kind of, I don't know. It's either like a dream come true for a research student or I don't know. I don't know how you end up there.
It's kind of a hybrid. So I grew up in Pennsylvania. I'm an absolutely avid fisherman. I probably fish at least 200 days of the year still.
Nice.
And I was going to do engineering, and my mom was like, you know what, you love fishing, you need to do something with fishing. So I came down to Tampa. I studied marine biology. Around my senior year, I realized that marine biology wasn't really a job, and I had to focus in a specific aspect of that. So I decided to go to LSU. I got my master's in fisheries and aquaculture management. So I'm kind of one of the, more unique people that I have the science background and the biology and the fisheries management background, but I'm really just a fisherman. So I take everything from the fisherman's perspective. And then I worked for IGFA doing all the fishing records and the angler recognition programs, the Grand Slams and trophy clubs.
Really?
And, so that's what I did before this. And then I kind of took this job to take some of that, recreational fishing side of things into the science world more.
That's cool. How long were you with IGFA?
About 2 years.
Mm-hmm. That's did you like that? I mean, that's pretty cool. I think that that's like, I don't know. I mean, I've submitted a couple of records and did that Grand Slam thing. I just think it's a good organization that's got, I don't know. I mean, world records like that. That's super cool.
That it was one of the coolest jobs. I mean, I can't lie. Every day I got to speak with an angler from somewhere else in the or somewhere else in the world. I mean, I was working with the director of the Japan Game Fish Association, Australia, working with people from all over the world every day. So the coolest part was the people you got to meet and the stories you got to hear. Because as fishermen, we love talking about fishing. So
Yeah.
it was a great job, and I got to start to do more like social media and more comms work. So that's kind of what also helped me, take on a comms role, even though I have no traditional training in communications or marketing. But I kind of started to do more of that.
And then you move away from what has you move away from the IGFA? A different opportunity, or like what was it that had you move away?
Just this opportunity that kind of gives me the chance to use my background a little bit more in fisheries management. And my passion has always been connecting like the everyday angler with the science. I think the more fishermen can be involved in science, the better it is for the resource, the more trust we can have between scientists and fishermen. It's just better for the whole process. So it kind of got a chance to use my background and my passion a little bit more to support the resource in this role.
What do you think the status of, like you mentioned, trust between fishermen and scientists? What do you think? Where do you think that is currently?
I think it's getting it's tough and it varies by the sector, but there's still a huge gap. We have a long way to come, in my opinion. And it's, there's issues on the recreational side. There's also issues on the science and management side of, things are confusing. Like I have a master's in fisheries management, and you go to these council meetings and it's hard for me to even follow. So how is someone without that background, just an everyday fisherman, going to follow that process?
Right. And so the process that you're talking about, like what is hard for somebody like you to follow? Like how, like, I mean, I can think of plenty of things that are hard for me to follow, but when you're referencing something like that, like what specifically are you would confuse you?
Well, first of all, when you go to, there's a 2-page initial document with acronyms that you have to learn to understand what they're even talking about. But then you have, your different catch limits, your different catch targets, your allocations, how dead discards incorporate. Really, the stock assessment process is what's the most difficult to understand. And that's the most important because it kind of determines everything. All the science goes into the stock assessment process, which goes into management decisions. So it's not just, someone going out there to collect data or reproductive studies or discard mortality. That's like a tiny piece of the whole pie or the bigger picture.
Right. And that's, I mean, all of that, when you just think about that as a recreational fisherman or a professional fishing guide, that's pretty confusing, like to think about all of that. But yet, recently we've had like the Goliath Grouper open for catch. And I had a couple of people on the podcast talking about that, which I thought was really interesting because one of the things that I had not really taken into account as far as like, when you're going out there, as an angler or a guide or a diver or somebody, it's obvious that there are so many Goliath groupers out there. And it's like, well, why hasn't
Yep.
this opened before? And it was explained to me, well, because there was no catch data. There's no data on this. And so I really thought that
Yeah.
was a real win for all of us, for there to be any sort of experimental season on the Goliath grouper, because I think the scientists are saying, okay, well, it seems like there is enough here, and let's open this little experimental season, even though we don't have the catch data. And I just think that, when that first started, people are like, well, it should be way more than 200. And then the scientists are like, maybe, or maybe not. I don't know. But I thought it was a pretty good move from the science community and the law enforcement community to open that without the catch data that might be required to change a limit or to change a season for other fish. Right? It just didn't exist because the Goliath grouper has been closed for so long. Which I guess, with this conversation, the Goliath grouper is also a fish that has barotrauma, right? And that's one that you have to use a descending device on often.
That's a tough one. Because if you catch a 200-pound, how much weight are you using to descend a 200-pound
Right.
Goliath? Or even venting them's very tough too. With their skin is so thick.
Well, I mean, you've got a regular horse
that
needle like that on any kind of snapper would be. You could push it all the way through the whole snapper, right? But not it doesn't even hit the cavity on a Goliath grouper. You need something much bigger, I guess. What? Let's talk about that for a second. Like when you do catch the Goliath grouper, something big like that. What's the protocol? How much weight do you need? What device works the best? I don't know.
So the best practice for those bigger species is still being studied. So I'm actually part of on an advisory panel for a project right now that's ongoing, specifically for Goliath grouper. Now more people may be targeting them. As to what are those best release practices? Is it better to have a descending device and use your anchor to lower them down? Is it better to have? I've seen people do it. Sometimes you need a lot of weight to get those things down. Is it better to have a big venting tool on board? And what this really, my advice, it's still ongoing, the research for this, but what my advice to the group was, you got to look at this in two ways. There's people targeting Goliath grouper that, they might be able to bring extra weight. They might be able to bring a cinder block or something to descend a fish with. But then you have a lot of people that are reef fishing that may accidentally catch one. And now what do they have on board to bring that fish down? So we're still looking at practical solutions to that best practice to help these fish survive release. So thankfully the slot limit is smaller. So I think a lot of these fish will be targeted in shallower depths where, for harvest for the people who get that permit.
Yeah,
but
you
have a lot of people going deep. Yeah, you have a lot of people targeting them as, it's cool to catch a 500-pound fish.
Well, it is cool to catch a 500-pound fish, but whether you want to or not, I mean, you can catch one when you're yellowtailing. Like you can catch them anytime, right? And it doesn't have to be deep.
Yeah.
And they can you could hook one shallow, and they could take you very deep, and then you're pulling it up, and maybe you have barotrauma there. But the one thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about using your anchor is a lot of people are anchored up. And so now they catch this fish. So then what? Like now you're going to have to pull your anchor. And how are you pulling your anchor in really, like you've got 400 feet of anchor line out and you're going to need to use an anchor ball and you got this Goliath grouper. That seems more difficult than maybe just like, oh, we'll just use your anchor. You got to have a second anchor prepared.
Thankfully for spot lock, that option does exist sometimes.
Yeah.
But, I totally get what you're saying. And honestly, right now, the best practice is if people do want to target them, probably don't target them deeper. But again, like you said, it just happens as bycatch. They're all over a lot of the wrecks and reefs in South Florida and even, up through our area here in Tampa. I was on my paddleboard end of last year. I fish and spearfish from my paddleboard, and I dove in 10 feet of water and was swimming next to a 200-pounder. in 10 feet of water here, right off the seagrass flats. So
Yeah.
they're everywhere, and they also like to eat everything basically that gets hooked.
Yeah,
So
they eat
it's
everything.
tough.
They eat everything, but for the
Yeah.
purposes of this conversation, it's the ones that you get in the deep water and you pull them up, and then they get the barotrauma. That's
Yeah.
really tough. Let's talk about the actual devices. So you don't have a device, like Return 'em Right doesn't have a device that you're
Nope.
selling. So how do you well, there's a lot of different kinds of devices out there. There's homemade ones, commercially produced ones, different styles, different ideas of how to do this, all for the same kind of thing. You're trying to take a fish back down to depth and release them properly. So tell me about the ones that you've seen, the different styles, the different types of devices, and which ones that you've seen work the best. Like if somebody's looking for one of these, like what do they look for?
Yeah, so there's a variety of styles. There's which we lump into three main categories. You have your lip grip ones that just attach to the bottom jaw of the fish, carries them down, and it either pops open due to pressure, or there's also some mechanical release ones where you kind of jerk the rod up and it opens the clamp. Then there's inverted hook styles, which is exactly what it sounds like, an inverted barbless hook that you, in combination with a weight, carries the fish down, and when you reel back in, it slides right out of their mouth like a skewer. And then there's some weighted crates. People have used crab traps with like chains around them, or milk crates with dive weights. I don't see them used as commonly, but those are the three main options. The most popular one is probably the Sequelizer, which you can set the depth on. They make a shallow water standard version and a deep water. You just simply set the depth, clip it on the lower jaw, and drop them down. And as soon as it hits that depth, it releases. You have the Fish Saver, Captain Roy's Fish Saver. So this was actually invented, this inverted hook style, by they invented this because they were dealing with this issue, and they didn't want to see floaters. None of us want to see fish float off, but they were out of season, so they actually got fined because they kept some because they didn't want to waste them.
Mm-hmm.
They got fined, I think, by FWC. They shared the story with us because they're like, I don't want to see them float off and die, and that led them to invent a Fish Saver, which is a great one. There's a Shelton Fish Descender. So there's a lot of different styles commercially available. But like you said, you can make them at home yourself. So there's really no excuse. You can't use it costs too much as an excuse, because you can bend a wire and use a weight for less than $10. And I know if you're offshore fishing,
can you pull one of those out and show it to the camera? Yeah, like that.
Yeah. So this is the Roy's Fish Saver. It's kind of a bigger inverted hook style, and it has a tuna clip on it. And you simply put a weight on the one end, and then it carries the fish down, and you just reel up and it slides right out. Right here, you have the Sequelizer device, which looks just like a boga grip.
Mm-hmm.
You clamp the jaws on the bottom, pop them open like that, and you set the depth on the back by aligning the split ring with the screw head, pushing and turning, and you can adjust it. And then this is the Shelton Fish Descender. This one's popular more in California for rockfish. It's a little smaller, as you can see. So if you tried to use this on bigger snapper or grouper, it might be a little bit more challenging. But those are three of probably the more commonly known or more commonly commercially available devices. This is also another one. This is a Sealator. And it's just simply an inverted hook that flips on its own. So you lower it down and it sends the fish down based on the buoyancy on the water. Then you reel in and it slides right out. So there's lots of different devices, and we promote the use of them, and we try to teach people how to use them properly, how to make it an easy part of the fishing experience. That's a big thing I'm working on right now specifically. We're doing well to overcome that awareness gap, but now how do we make it easier on anglers? Because really we want this to be a positive part of your fishing experience. And the easier it is, the more positive it'll be, and the more time you'll get to spend fishing, and the less time you'll have to spend worrying about how to get these fish back down.
Right. I mean, well, I don't think anybody wants to see, a line of red snappers floating behind their boat. Like it's bad. And if that continues, my thought would be, well, what would FWC do to prevent that? Well, they might just close that area, or might just close off fishing. Like so I think that, you're trying to save the fish, but you're also, or anglers should also be thinking, we should really be watching out for our fishing rights here, because like if you're not operating, ethically and legally, and you're doing it by accident, but you're not doing anything about, you're releasing these fish like you're supposed to, but they're all dying. Well, at some point, somebody steps in and says, "Look, this can't go on like this. We're going to have to do something." And what would be the most likely thing that they would do is close it down. Nobody wants to see that either. So I think you have an obligation as an ethical angler to do everything that you can to release a fish that's healthy, but also you got a responsibility to the community that you need to be operating, in a way that it's obviously not a detriment to your community, like of anglers, right?
Yeah.
Have
Look
you
at
ever seen? Go ahead.
Look at the South Atlantic. There's discussions of closing the whole bottom to fishing for part of the year. I don't think that's gone through, but that was a discussion, and that's,
Why
we
is
don't want to
that?
see that anywhere.
Why would that be even a discussion in the South Atlantic?
Because there's so many dead discards that, when like that, what do we do? How do we overcome this dead discards
So
issue?
I wasn't
close
aware
down
of that.
the fishing.
Yeah, I wasn't aware
Yeah,
that's something that's even being considered. But that was my first, when I was kind of preparing for this podcast, I was just thinking about it, and I was like, that's something that really could happen. That you could just, they say, well, we can't seem to do anything about this. It's happening accidentally, but the only thing that we can do about it is just to close this whole area or to close this season, which nobody wants that. I don't even think the FWC wants that, right? Like nobody wants that.
No.
But if that's the only solution, then I guess you have to. But it's not. If you learn how to use these descending devices, and if we can get the descending devices into the hands of way more anglers than have them right now, because you're saying, it was roughly a quarter of the anglers that are fishing in the Gulf of Mexico have them and know about them and know how to use them.
A third were even aware of them. So that didn't mean they use them. I think less than half of them use them. So you're talking about a lot less than a quarter that even use them.
Wow.
But based on what you said, you make a great point. And the way I see it is that using these devices is kind of like our insurance policy. We can't control the red tide fully. There's chemical pollution, stuff getting dumped in the water, which doesn't help. But we can't control red tide. We can't control changing ocean patterns, food availability, wind, current, sea surface temperatures to an extent. There's all these things affecting our fishery that we have no control over. The one thing as anglers that we have control over is what happens to that fish after we release it. Not everyone's going to survive. No one's ever going to say that. But what you do have control over is, giving that fish its best chance to survive release. And it's an insurance policy because really, something goes wrong somewhere else, that helps us. We're at least we're doing our part to make sure we're keeping the fishery as healthy as possible.
Right. Now, with the funding that comes from the Deepwater Horizon, you're able to just buy these commercially available products, and then you go right to your website, and one of the first things you see is get free gear, right? So how does that work, and which devices do you choose, and I don't know, maybe somebody out there's got a device that works better than anything that we've seen before, and they want to get in touch with you. I don't know. Or anglers just want, okay, well, I'll take a free one. So how does that whole program work?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time discussing the package, which I have right here. This is what you get to your front door after you complete our online education module, which only takes about 15 minutes. So we spent a lot of time discussing, what gear we wanted to, procure, what we wanted to ship, what that package would look like. And we had an open invitation to bid process through the University of Florida. So any manufacturers could bid on this project. And if, like you said, if anyone does, want to get involved, I encourage them to reach out to us because we're not exclusive to any company. And then from different effectiveness studies, so we looked at effectiveness studies, user error, what anglers preferred. From there, we awarded contracts to 3 different manufacturers. Actually, the only 3 that bid on the project, these 3 that I'm showing you right now. So we awarded contracts to all of them so that we try to promote them all. Now, the package we have right now it includes, it's actually a package you can't get commercially. It actually includes a sequelizer pre-rigged to a weight
Really?
via a three-way swivel and a loop knot. So you get
Dang.
this whole package here,
Who
and you
pays
get a second inverted.
who pays the shipping on that? That
Yeah,
seems it seems like the
we
weight is expensive.
so we do, and unfortunately, shipping costs have doubled in the last year as
Yeah,
a
no
lot of
kidding.
things have increased. But you also get an inverted hook descending device. So we send two descending devices and the weight to make it happen. So it's really as easy as can be. This weight is looped on as well. So I tell people, if you're catching more undersized, loop on and put a smaller weight. You might not need 3 pounds, but this will get, from my personal experience, this will get like a 15, 16 pound snapper down. So
Hmm.
pretty good sized fish.
Okay.
And you'd rather have more weight than not enough, and the fish still be floating.
Now, is it possible to take them down too quickly?
From most of the research that's out there, the answer is currently no. It seems like they do okay going down pretty quick. And given the state of sharks and dolphins, I think getting them to the bottom closer to their habitat quicker is actually a good thing. But it is a question that's asked frequently, like, because as divers you come up slowly and
Right.
adjust. But no, it's based on the current research and evidence. It's get them to the bottom as quickly as possible, and get them released and get them back to where they can actually find protection from the school or get back under the structure you caught them from.
Hmm. And when you're using the sequelizer and you're actually having to set a depth, how do you instruct people to use that?
So I tell people to set it and have your setup rigged before you even drop a first bait down. So if you're fishing in 170, set it to 150. I always tell people as close to the bottom as possible. So the science is kind of varied, but it usually says a third to a half the capture depth is how far you want to get them so that they can actually recompress enough to the point where they can swim back down. But again, I prefer to get fish as close to the bottom as possible because that's, you don't want them swimming past predators any more than they have to, especially after they just fought their whole way up. They
Right.
don't have all the energy they had 10 minutes prior.
Yeah. It's a good thing. So you're like 20 feet off the bottom in whatever depth well, I mean, if it's like you said 170, put it at 150. So if you're at 200, you
Yeah.
put it at like 180 or something, or
Well, that's the thing with the sequelizer. That's the one downside is you have increments. So you have set
oh,
increments. So the standard one, you can only set to 50 feet, 100 feet, or 150 feet. Now they make a deep water version that's 100, 200, or 300 feet. And there's a shallow water 30, 60, 90. So again, it's close to the bottom, so if you're 190, then I still have to do 150. But if you have a deep water one and you go to 210, then do 200. So, as close to the bottom as possible is what's best. In my opinion, the science may say halfway is all you need, but again, I'm very well aware of the current state of predators
yeah.
that we deal with on a normal basis. So I think getting them down close to the bottom is best.
Wow. So how long do you expect that the funding will last on this project to be able to continue to do what you're doing? Do you have any forecast on that or?
Yeah, I can estimate. It depends on how costs go up. If we change the package at all, if we reduce the value, if we take the weights out and shipping's shipping's less expensive, then we could probably give out more devices. But since we launched May 3rd last year, and it's been a pretty incredible response. As of today, we've had 12,400 anglers who fish offshore complete our module, and we've shipped them all gear. So that's 12,400 more people with gear in their hands, aware of the issue. We make sure that they go through the training first. We're not just giving gear to anyone. And we're looking at, from a gear perspective, somewhere around, maybe 40, 50,000 packages. So maybe the next couple of years, depending on the demand, we can't really say for sure how quickly they'll go. But since May of last year, we did a little bit over 12,000 packages.
Wow, that's really good. Is that
Yeah.
Did you expect more, less? Did you have any expectations whatsoever?
Well, we had quite a successful launch that first month. I think we gave out I think we did the first week. I think we did 2 or 3 thousand packages or something.
Wow.
So we had a lot of initial demands. We had a pre-registration list. We had our press release was picked up like 30 times or something. I think last year we had 65 media mentions. So we had a lot of press, and it led to a very quick launch. And we actually scaled it back. It used to be one per angler, three per household max, but we had to deal with the demand. We had to scale back to one per household, or one per shipping address. So, I think realistically, with continued education, outreach, pushing, marketing, we could probably do, I think 10,000 a year is realistic. And, you're looking at 40,000, around 4 years or so.
Wow, that's really good. And one of the things that I'm trying to do on this podcast a little more often is when we talk about these things, instead of waiting till the very end to give all the important information about the website and how people do things like this, go through the process of where you would go and what this education process looks like, and how somebody would actually get one of these devices or all of your whole package.
It's as simple as could be. You go to returnemright.org. That's returnemright.org. You'll see a button right on the home screen that says Get Free Gear. There's some instructions on the little module. You click to begin the module, and it starts with a few questions so we can, gauge your role in the fishery, where you fish. And immediately up front, we say if you're eligible for gear or not, because again, I encourage anglers, if you're not going to, like, if you're an inshore fisherman, you have no intentions to go offshore, don't say that you fish offshore to get this gear, because it's meant to support the resource. But then from there, once you have the option to begin, whether you're eligible or not, and it takes about 15 minutes, we have two slides on just general best practices. So how to be prepared for your trip. We all make a plan when we're fishing, but a lot of us don't really think about the plan for releasing fish, or what species we're going to catch, what bycatch we're going to encounter. It's very frustrating when, anglers go offshore and there's a fish flopping around on the deck for 5 minutes while they're looking up the rules and regulations, trying to figure out if they can keep it or not.
Right.
And then we go into barotrauma, venting, and descending. So the average completion time is 14 minutes. It's really not burdensome at all. A couple cool videos on there and how to vent. I think you had a podcast with my colleague David Moss. He mentioned the video from Brendan Runs about the red grouper descending. It's an absolutely awesome video. It was caught in 215 feet of water. And since red grouper have that softer body, they really blow up more than red snapper. So you can really see the recompression upon descent. And that fish was actually tagged and tracked for like 5 months to demonstrate long-term survival, not just, what they saw in the video.
Yeah. That's cool.
And there's also, so it's really quick. And then at the end, there's a shipping form. You click to submit your shipping address, confirm you want the gear. And, within a week or two, depending on the demand, we mail it to your front door.
That's cool. And then, so there are other people, like you mentioned, David Moss, Nature Conservancy, if I'm not mistaken. How do you work with them and their, like, other organizations or groups that kind of have a similar mission to get this information and these devices into the hands of people that need to use them? How do you all work together? Is it a competitive thing? Is it a working together kind of deal? I would imagine that it is.
Yeah, it's, we're all doing this for the same common goal. It supports anglers. Like you said, we don't want to lose access in the future. And it also supports the future of the fishery. The end goal is just a healthier overall fishery that, we get to utilize as much as possible. So we support each other. David and I had a booth next to each other at ICAST last year. We actually have a Southeast descending device team. We meet with once or, a few times a year just to see what we're going on, see if we can collaborate on anything. So we all support each other. We share resources. Really, we try to have a common message. So we're not leading anglers astray. Obviously, the regulations are a little different in the areas, but we work together really well. We support each other. And we try to make this a concerted push and try to keep everyone involved and education out there flowing as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, for the purposes of education, there are people out there that have purchased these descending devices. They understand that they need them. They're fishing in areas where they can use them. One of the things that you mentioned was how to be prepared before you go out. So some of these people, they've already got their devices and they're not going to go to your website and they're not going to take this deal. So let's go over like what what the best practices are when somebody's going to go out reef fishing and maybe it's a new area, maybe they have no idea what they're going to catch. I don't know. What kind of advice are you giving people?
Well, first and foremost, if you're planning on fishing deeper than 30, 40, 50 feet, have a descending device and a venting tool on board, and have enough weight to descend fish. So you can use a swivel or a loop knot, but make sure you have like, a 1, 2, 3 pound weight. Have a couple of them in case you need to add weight and you catch a monster, black grouper out of season or something, and you need to descend it. So just be prepared, bring what you need to bring just in case you run into a situation. And then it's really just kind of knowing the signs and the symptoms and the situations where you would have to use those devices. So if you're fishing for, yellowtailing or fishing in shallower depths, like 30 feet, have a de-hooker with you, and don't even, if the fish isn't displaying signs of barotrauma, if its eyes aren't bulging, if it's not bloated, if its stomach isn't coming out of its mouth, use a de-hooker, just get that fish back in the water as quickly as possible. And as you go deeper, pay attention to the depth, and know when you might experience barotrauma. So if you're fishing 80 feet, you should know that, a fish you release might float off. So you're going to need to either vent or descend the fish. And like I said, being prepared at that depth. So if you're fishing 120, have your device already rigged up, have it set to the right depth, and before you begin fishing, because it's better to be prepared in advance. But that's really the best thing, and work quickly. I tell everyone this, whether you're dehooking, venting, or descending. I can't stress enough how important it is to get those fish back in the water quickly. I've vented hundreds of fish, and if you mess around on the surface and they're out of the water too long, the survival's not as great.
Yeah, that's great advice. Go ahead.
On that notion, I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, that fish is going to swim down eventually." It's almost like them justifying or trying to tell themselves that they didn't accidentally kill a fish by letting it float off. Mm-hmm. Barotrauma actually gets worse on the surface. So there's the ideal gas law for anyone who likes physics out there. PV equals nRT. So volume is actually related to temperature. So if you've ever left your water bottle in your car on a hot day, and then you get back in the car and it's steamy and expanded, so that's the volume increasing to offset the increase in temperature. So the longer a fish sits on the deck, the longer it's floating away on the surface, the barotrauma is actually getting worse.
Wow. Okay, so they're not just going to swim down eventually. They're going to get eaten by a shark, or they're just going to float off like that. What about what about when you get a fish and the stomach comes out of the mouth, and what do you should you try to push that back in, or just descend them, or is there anything that you should be doing when that happens? Like sometimes these fish look like there's no possible way that they would be okay. Their eyes are almost popped out of their skull, and their stomach is out. But from the videos that I've seen, those fish do really well. But I'm just wondering if there's something. Should you try to push that stomach back in, or like a lot of times it's like a balloon, and I've seen people pop it like, oh, well, that's going to keep them from swimming down, so they pop that stomach. But I don't know what the right thing to do is in that situation.
Yeah, you never want to pop that stomach. That's a old misconception, is that right. You just, take the hook and pop the stomach. They might go down, but putting a hole in their stomach is not a good idea for that fish. I actually, if you look at our Instagram too, we have a lot of videos, and there's a few red grouper videos with their stomach sticking out, and we descend them. So descending them is the best option, in my opinion. You're letting all those gases recompress naturally. So that stomach will go back into place naturally. Now you can vent the fish, again, but you don't want to stab the stomach. You still vent behind the pec fin, let the gas escape, and throw them back. But when the stomach's coming out like that, I in my opinion, it's the best thing to do is descend them. Just clip it on the lower jaw. Or if you're using an inverted hook, you can actually go in the mouth and out the soft tissue under the chin, so you don't pierce the stomach, and just send them down and let that gas recompress, so that what's filling that stomach up will also recompress. Even the eyeballs, it's all the gases in the body that are expanding on the way up. It's not just the swim bladder that causes the issue. So that's why you get the bulging eyes as well. So yeah, it's pretty cool that there's some fish that, can have some permanent damages, like in the lens and the eye, if it's severe. But they go back to pretty much normal a lot of the time if you just drop them and get them as close to the bottom as possible. That Brendan Run video from NC State I mentioned, that thing's eyes were like fully out of its head, and
Yeah.
it lived for 5 months.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool, and that's just, that's a huge misconception that videos and GoPros have helped overcome, is that fish is dead anyway. A lot of anglers tell me that at fishing clubs, and I'm like, well, check out these videos.
Right.
They're not actually dead if you bring them back down.
And tell people where they can see those videos.
Yeah, so you can go to, through our education module, we'll show you a couple of videos. But if you go to our YouTube at Return 'em Right, we have more videos on there. And also follow us on Instagram. I like posting a lot of videos and reels, so I send a camera down with almost all the fish we descend. And so I make a lot of reels and different videos with those. So check out our social media. It's all at Return 'em Right, and then YouTube as well. We have quite a few videos. And it's cool to see. It's cool to see the fish kind of go back to normal. Survival's never going to be 100%, but we can give them a pretty darn good chance.
Yeah, and with all the different species that you're returning and videoing, is there one that just seems to do the very best with it? Like you mentioned, the red grouper really pops, really blows up like a balloon. And then when you send it back down, it looks like, wow, that's a big difference right there. But I just wondered if there was one that always just pops off that device every single time and swims away real strong, or if you've noticed any species that does better than others.
I don't know if I've noticed the species. So like I mentioned, like the red grouper, just the softer bodies, they're just naturally going to blow up more like a balloon. The same thing's happening with red snapper, but they're so armored that, you don't really see you don't see them bloat as much. You kind of have to feel their stomach, and you'd feel that it's hard. So you don't really see the recompression as much. But I don't think I've really noticed a single species do a lot better on descent or worse for that matter. But I will say I feel like the smaller fish, maybe it's because they didn't fight as hard getting up, or maybe they got up to the surface quicker because they were smaller or didn't use as build up enough lactic acid. But I feel like they really pop off the device and take off like a bullet back to the bottom, which is kind of cool to see.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So when you see it on video, it's encouraging for sure. Well, that's awesome, man. So do you have any other kind of goals with this program? Are there any other offshoots of this, or is it straight up just trying to get these devices in people's hands?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, Return 'em Right is this, Florida Sea Grant. We work really heavily on the education and outreach side. There's a whole research and monitoring and evaluation side that I haven't talked much about. My colleague at the commission actually works on that side, so we're a partnership in this effort. And he's funding studies, like I mentioned, to address release mortality, to address depredation. And he's also establishing observer programs, or reestablishing in Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, so that we can actually have observers on the water account for the device use. So this is an all-encompassing project where we're not just looking at getting these in the hands. We're actually looking at collecting the data so that they can be incorporated in the stock assessment process, because that's the end goal, right?
Yeah.
We want the resource managers to know that we're doing the right thing. So that's a really, really cool side of the project that most people are probably unaware of, is that we're putting a tremendous amount of resource into, the people that do record this, the people that do surveys, so that, this can be recorded. And actually on some of the surveys, we have had questions added on venting and descending in hopes that, the stock assessment scientists can incorporate this into future assessments.
Where would these observers be? Like on commercial boats, or where would an observer be?
They're typically on charter for hire boats, so either head boats or charter boats. So a lot of the head boats in my area will have observers on them.
Yeah,
in Tampa Bay here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, man. Well, I think that what you're doing is definitely very good. I encourage everybody that fishes offshore to go and do your surveying, whether they get the free gear or go buy a descending device or make one yourself or do however. But I do definitely encourage the use of it because it works. And if you doubt that it works, go and check out these videos. It's really incredible to watch these fish just swim right off and to see what they looked like before, because they didn't look like they were going to swim off.
Mm-hmm.
It did not look like they were going to swim off.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. But anyway, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it. And once again, why don't you give everybody the places to go, the social media and everything one more time, just to make sure that everybody got it.
Yep, returnthemright.org for best practices, science, resource, everything involving barotrauma. Email us and any question. I'm happy to talk to you, whether it's about setup or how to make it easier on your boat. Info@returnthemright.org is our email. And then on all of our social media platforms @returnthemright, message us. We're here to be a resource to anglers. I'm a fisherman. I'll answer anyone who reaches out, if it's whether it's about this project or you just want to talk fishing. We're here for you.
I think they want some of those big black grouper spots. I think you'll get a lot more emails. You're going to get a lot more emails if you start giving those spots out. But anyway, all right, man. Well, Nick, thanks, man. I appreciate what you're doing, and let us know how we can help in the future. But as of now, I appreciate you coming on, man. It's a great program.
I appreciate talking with you, Tom. Thanks for having us.
All right, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week. See ya.